Robert Peter Kissel was born on April 21, 1963, in Manhattan and was raised in the New Jersey suburbs. He was born to William Kissel, a prominent businessman, and was the middle child among 3 siblings. His elder brother, Andrew Kissel, and younger sister, Jane Kissel Clayton, completed the family. Robert shared a close bond with Andrew, who was 4 years older, and they enjoyed a healthy competition for success from a young age. Even as teenagers, their personalities diverged. Robert was a talented sportsman and the quintessential all-American boy, with an intuitive knack for numbers and a natural inclination to help others. Andrew, however, was more focused on personal achievement and would go to great lengths to secure success. Robert pursued his education at the University of Rochester's College of Engineering and later at New York University, graduating in 1986. After attending the University of Rochester, he put his bachelor's degree in optical engineering to use by joining his father's toner business. In 1987, he took a trip to a Club Med resort in the Turks and Caicos Islands, a journey that would change his life. There, he met a 22-year-old waitress named Nancy Keeshan, whose vivacious personality and attractive presence captivated him. Their connection grew stronger, and about 2 years later, the couple moved in together, eventually marrying in 1989. Nancy Keeshan was born on May 1, 1964, to Gene and Ira Keeshan. Originally from Michigan, she moved to Oakland, California, with her mother following her parents' divorce. She pursued art studies at the Parsons School of Design in Manhattan's Greenwich Village while working in various restaurants, including E.J.'s Luncheonette. The union of Robert and Nancy set the stage for the events that would follow. In 1990, a year after their wedding, Robert pursued further education at New York University's Leonard N. Stern School of Business, where he graduated in 1991 with a master's degree in business administration. During his time at NYU, Robert studied under Edward Altman, a renowned finance professor known for inventing the Z-score, a mathematical formula to assess a company's risk of bankruptcy. Impressed by Robert's capabilities, Altman appointed him as a teaching assistant. He reflected on Robert's time as a student and stated that Robert was a very bright, ambitious, and pleasant student who really blossomed after his graduation. He also claimed that Robert was very focused and intense in his work. During this period, Nancy Kissel had stopped attending art school to support Robert while he pursued his studies at NYU. In 1991, Robert began his career at Leidenberg Thalmann and Company, a Wall Street investment firm where he specialized in distressed debt. A year later, he moved to Lazard Frères and Company and became a vice president in the high yield by 1997. Robert joined Goldman Sachs and was sent to Hong Kong as a managing director in its Asian Special Situations Group. In Asia, Robert faced the aftermath of an economic crisis, with opportunities arising from distressed debt. Foreign investors had dumped shares, which created cutthroat conditions in businesses. In June 2000, Robert moved to Merrill Lynch, the largest U.S. securities firm by brokers, to lead its Asian distressed debt business. Over the next 2 years, Merrill purchased at least $500 million of bad debts in Korea and around another $200 million in Taiwan. Robert had brought along his friend and colleague, David Ngo from Goldman. In the wake of the crisis, Robert gained immense respect as a top-tier investor in Asia. Joseph Draper, a Hong Kong-based managing director at Citigroup Incorporated, the world's largest financial services company, collaborated with Kissel to purchase bad debts in Taiwan. The duo had prepared rival bids for the $1.8 billion of distressed debt from the Bank of China at the time when Robert's life was tragically cut short. Through all the downfalls and successes, Robert and Nancy remained close to his brother Andrew and his wife, Haley Wolf. They ventured into business together, with Robert investing $500,000 in one of Andrew's real estate companies. They occasionally vacationed together at multi-million-dollar homes in Stratton, Vermont. This was a resort in the Green Mountains about 4 hours north of New York where they had skied as children. It was a blessed model family, and they had everything they could ever want. By 2000, Nancy Kissel had 2 small children, Elaine in June and an infant named Reese. The move to Hong Kong brought additional pressure for both her and the family. Adjusting to the foreign environment and being frequently alone due to Robert's extensive travels made it challenging. Robert's demanding work schedule left him with little time for his children. Despite these challenges, Nancy excelled as a mother. They took time to settle into the new environment, but eventually began to find spaces to pursue their hobbies. In a city without skiing, Robert still found time for sports, participating in Trail Walker, a grueling 60-mile mountain trek taking 12 to 48 hours to finish. Nancy dedicated herself to volunteer work, contributing at the Hong Kong International School, a $15,000 a year private school attended by their two oldest children, and at the United Jewish Congregation. She also organized an annual Halloween party for all the residents of their 20-story tower at Parkview, the largest private housing estate in Tai Tam, Hong Kong. In 2003, at the age of 40, Robert became an expatriate banker, leading a lavish life in a $20,000 a month, a 3,270 square foot apartment with a breathtaking view of Hong Kong's skyline and the South China Sea. His sleek silver Porsche Carrera, to live in Filipina maids, and a $20 million fortune spoke of his prosperity. And this was the same year he was found lying dead, wrapped in a carpet. The incident began when Robert missed a conference call on November 3, 2003, according to David, his colleague and friend. Concern grew as he didn't show up for an important meeting the next day, where they were supposed to prepare a bid for Bank of China's distressed debt. As the week went on, colleagues and friends became more worried about Robert. By Wednesday, November 4th, David decided to inform the authorities about his disappearance. After this call, Hong Kong authorities went to the Kissel residence, where they met Nancy and their 3 children. Was nowhere to be seen. Consider it a simple gut feeling, but officers felt a bit uneasy about the situation. Despite the place looking clean, they didn't like how Nancy behaved or talked about Robert. She made it clear to officers that she filed a missing persons report that very same morning, claiming he had left after assaulting her. However, officers didn't believe her story. From an intuitive perspective, Robert's disappearance didn't make sense. So investigators finally discovered what they were searching for. A serviceman at the complex had tipped them off about Nancy seeking help to move an old rug into the apartment garage. This rug proved to be exceptionally heavy, requiring 4 service members to handle it. And those who assisted noted a suspicious fishy smell. When they entered the storage room, investigators swiftly located the item of interest. Behind the door, there was a rolled-up oriental rug, tied tightly with rope and secured with layers of tape. On top of the rug was a pillow and a bag filled with bed sheets, and they all appeared oddly bulky. As they unrolled the rug, suspicion transformed into sheer horror. Inside, with a plastic bag secured around his head, lay the lifeless body of Robert Kissel. His entire form was wrapped within a large white plastic bag and bound with layers of tape. Investigators immediately recognized that he had been deceased for a considerable period as the unmistakable odor of decay permeated the scene. At 2:41 a.m. on November 7, 2003, a mere 2 hours after the discovery of Robert Kissel's body, police officers arrested Nancy Kissel. She faced charges for the murder of her own husband. When police examined Robert Kissel's body, they found out he was hit 5 times with a blunt object. An autopsy showed he had 5 prescription medications in his stomach, which included a strong sedative called Rohypnol. During Nancy's interrogation, she asserted that Robert came at her with a baseball bat, and in self-defense, she swung back. According to her, she then blacked out and had no memory of how he died and ultimately ended up wrapped in a carpet. She also said that for years Robert had subjected her to both mental and physical abuse. Nancy also claimed that her husband had a history of cocaine abuse and heavy drinking. She portrayed a narrative of having endured years of mistreatment. Additionally, Nancy asserted that Robert Kissel had actively searched the internet for both male and female partners in Taiwan and Paris. Their life had seemed perfect, and to the world, they appeared happy. However, there was more lurking beneath the surface. As detectives looked deeper into the couple's history, a lot of information came to light. Robert and Nancy's story was like a roller coaster, and their love life had its ups and downs, much like their marriage. For many years, Rob and his wife seemed like a fantastic and fun couple, especially since Rob worked long hours and traveled a lot. But he made a fortune and they enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. Nancy came from a more modest background and loved the money. She shared a similarity with Andrew in that aspect. One of her best friends mentioned the more money she's got, the more she wanted to spend it. Even though Nancy sometimes boasted about her intimate life with Rob, things took a turn during a spring 2003 visit to their Vermont house. Nancy, along with the kids and one of their maids, went there to escape the Asian SARS threat, a viral respiratory illness that emerged in Asia in the early 2000s. During this time, Nancy needed someone to fix the house's sound system, and she reached out to Lance Del Piore, 41, recommended by Robert's brother. Lance sent his brother, Michael Del Piore, 42, to handle the repairs. This is when Nancy met the good-looking Vermonter. He showed up to repair her TV, and soon, he began bragging about the expensive jewelry Nancy had given him to the people around town. He even talked about the tattoo she got, which was something Robert, her husband, hadn't approved of. Nancy had started an affair with him, the man who lived in a trailer park near Stratton. She also claimed that Michael wasn't interested in her wealth and understood her struggles to be accepted for who she was as a person. He didn't judge her by where she lived, what she drove, or the kind of jewelry she wore. According to Lance Del Piore, who fired his brother over the affair, Nancy started to spend a lot of money on him. Even though he knew about the affair, Lance agreed not to tell Robert Randrew about it. Robert Kissel became suspicious of his wife, so on June 6, 2003, he hired Alpha Group Investigations, a private investigation firm in Farmingdale, New York, led by Frank Shea. The firm was paid a total of $25,000. Frank Shea, a former New York Police Department detective, sent investigator Rocco Gatta to Stratton to keep an eye on Nancy. Gatta spotted Michael Del Piore when he drove up to the house and immediately called Shea, who was on the phone with Robert. Robert then called Nancy and confronted her about the situation. Del Piore left the house shortly after, as reported by Gatta. On other occasions, Del Piore stayed at the house until late at night. Robert had also installed spyware on his wife's computer. When she returned from the US, he found out that she had conducted internet searches using very suspicious phrases like overdose of sleeping pills and medications causing heart attack. In August 2003, during a visit to New York, Robert confided in Shea, telling him he suspected he was being drugged, as he often felt woozy and disoriented. When Shea traveled to Hong Kong for other business, he met Robert for drinks at the China Club on September 6, 2003. Shea recalled telling Robert that Nancy was trying to get rid of him. After Robert heard this, he struggled to believe that his wife of 14 years would do such a thing. In late September, Robert discovered bills for a mobile phone that Nancy had acquired secretly, listing her address as the Hong Kong International School, according to David No. This discovery was the breaking point for Robert, and he confided in David about his marital problems. Despite their troubles, the couple still appeared in public together. On October 8, 2003, Nancy and Robert attended a banquet hosted by the International Bank of Asia in Hong Kong, where former U.S. President George H.W. Bush was the guest of honor. Due to having a terrible argument, according to Nancy, they arrived late for cocktails with Bush. During dinner, she approached Bush's table, tapped him on the shoulder, and asked if she could introduce him to her husband. The ex-president then even posed for photographs with them. In the last week of October, a few weeks after their public appearance, Robert informed David No that he planned to seek a divorce and intended to tell Nancy that Sunday night on November 2, 2003. Robert even told David about his readiness to fly Michael Del Piore to Hong Kong so that Nancy would stay there while he stayed close to their children. During that week, Nancy made appointments with 2 doctors and obtained prescriptions for hypnotic and sedative drugs, as later detailed by prosecutor Peter Chapman. On the Sunday in question, November 2nd, Robert Kissel and an acquaintance, Andrew Tanzer, returned to the Kissel apartment after their children played together at the Jewish Center. Nancy prepared 2 strawberry milkshakes and asked the children to give them to their fathers. When Tanzer inquired about the contents, she referred to it as a secret recipe. Tanzer returned to his apartment where he fell asleep and later exhibited strange behavior like consuming 3 tubs of ice cream, as testified by his wife, Kazuko Ochi. At 5 p.m. that day, David called Kissel and found him vague and unclear, tired and sleepy. Later that same night, police alleged that Nancy bludgeoned her husband to death using an 8.3-pound lead statue, a Kishin family heirloom topped with 2 female figurines. While looking at the sequence of events, it became very apparent to investigators that Nancy was responsible. According to them, Nancy had kept the body in their house for at least 2 nights before she called workers to move the carpet she had wrapped him in. The trial commenced in June 2005 at the High Court of Hong Kong, where the prosecution accused Nancy of murdering her husband, to which she pleaded not guilty. During her testimony, Nancy described how Robert, after their visit to the synagogue, revealed his intention to divorce her and retain custody of their children. She claimed that Robert, in response to her pressing for answers, slapped her across the face. This angered Nancy and led to a confrontation where she pointed her finger in Robert's face, a gesture he very much despised. She recounted how Robert, in a fit of rage, dragged her to the bedroom, threw her on the bed, and engaged in forceful, inappropriate acts with her. Nancy managed to break free during the struggle, and as she crawled away, Robert grabbed her leg and tried to pull her back. She panicked and grabbed a figurine and swung it around in defense. After this, Nancy believed the confrontation was over. However, Robert recovered, grabbed a metal bat, and began swinging it at her head while she used the figurine as a shield. According to Nancy's account, everything went blank at this point. She claimed no recollection of hitting Robert 4 more times with the heavy object, buying the rug, rolling him into it, or even calling maintenance to move it to storage. Although homicide detectives were aware Nancy had cleaned up the crime scene, she testified that she didn't remember any of it and only realized her husband was dead when informed by investigators. During the trial, a great deal of information regarding the aftermath of the murder was revealed. On the day when Robert met his tragic end, Nancy instructed her maids to purchase packing tape and rope. At the same time, she went carpet shopping and arranged for packing boxes to be delivered. These boxes were later filled with bloodied items, like the ornaments she wielded to commit the crime. On November 4th, she conversed with a female friend, confirmed her plan to fly to San Francisco on November 17th for cosmetic surgery on her breasts. On November 5th, Nancy hired workmen to transport Robert's body, wrapped in the carpet, to a storeroom. A workman vividly recalled the carpet gave off a strong, peculiar smell, similar to that of salted fish. Nancy and Del Piore exchanged frequent calls, as revealed by the prosecutor, who presented the phone numbers dialed from Nancy's cell phone in court. After the heinous act, Nancy visited a doctor, alleging assault by her husband. She told the same story to her father, Ira K. Shin, who promptly flew to Hong Kong to support her. On November 6th, Nancy filed a police report claiming assault. Nancy also claimed that she had contemplated taking her own life due to the constant abuse she faced from Robert, but resisted since she was fearful of the impact on her children. To get better, she looked for help and visited several doctors in Hong Kong and secured prescriptions for various medications, including the notorious date drug Rohypnol, as well as a painkiller, a sedative, an antidepressant, and a sleeping medication. All these substances were later found in Robert's system. After presenting these mysterious events in court, the judges were left to make their decision. Despite her attorney's efforts, this strategy failed, as prosecutors highlighted Nancy's marital deception, internet searches for drug combinations, and clear attempts to conceal the crime. Unanimously pronounced her guilty after 8 hours of deliberation on September 1, 2005. Consequently, she was sentenced to life in prison and entered the Hong Kong correctional system on the same day. Kissel appealed her conviction in April 2008. That petition was rejected. Confined to a Seve cell in the high-security sign on her door had the label, Lifer. After her appeal proved unsuccessful, she planned to explore the option of serving the rest of her sentence in a U.S. prison. Regardless, this marked a significant departure from her once privileged life at Parkview, where Robert Kissel's silver Porsche Carrera still sat unclaimed in the parking lot. But there was still more that would unfold in the legal battle. After lodging an appeal with the Court of Final Appeal on January 12, 2010, Nancy Kissel was granted a retrial after the court cited the prosecution's use of inadmissible evidence in the original trial. The retrial began on January 10, 2011. Sensing their client's difficult position, the defense tried to halt the proceedings for Nancy to enter a plea, but their request was denied. On March 25, 2011, the jury declared her guilty once again. Nancy Kissel returned to her cell at Tailin Women's Prison near the Chinese border, serving a mandatory life sentence. No additional appeal was filed by Nancy's lawyers. In April 2011, they submitted a request for her transfer to a U.S. prison under an international inmate exchange program that allows prisoners to serve sentences in their native countries. Simon Young, the director of the University of Hong Kong Center for Comparative and Public Law, mentioned that local authorities must communicate to the U.S. government the minimum time Kissel needs to serve before becoming eligible for parole for the transfer to proceed. In 2014, the Court of Final Appeal dismissed an appeal from her for the second conviction. During the same year, Nancy Kissel expressed having no regrets about her husband's death and revealed infrequent communication with her children in Seattle, Washington. Now turning our attention to the fate of the couple's innocent children. After their father's tragic murder and the imprisonment of their mother, they briefly stayed with their maternal grandfather, Ira Kishin, in Winnetka, outside Chicago. While they were there, a custody dispute emerged between Robert's two siblings, Andrew Kissel and his wife, Haley Kissel, and Robert's sister, Jane Kissel Clayton, along with her husband, Richard. Jane, residing with her family outside Seattle, became a central figure in this legal struggle for the children, Elaine, 11, June, 8, and Reese, 6. Their mother, Nancy Kissel, being in jail, made the inheritance of Robert's wealth a prominent aspect of the custody battle. It was estimated that the three children were receiving a monthly income of $1,000, of at least $10,000 from their father's estate for their living expenses. In December 2003, Andrew and his wife Haley sought temporary custody of Robert's three children, which the court granted in January 2004. During this time, Andrew faced legal challenges after being accused of defrauding a New York co-op board of millions of dollars. This included lawsuits from lenders, business partners, a title insurance company, and a yacht dealership. And during problems in Andrew's work life, he also started to face one at home. Haley, his wife, filed for divorce in March 2005. During these legal battles, Haley moved out and took custody of their two children and temporary custody of Robert and Nancy's three. The court-appointed attorney, Michael Colazano, described Andrew as a recovering alcoholic. Eventually, after legal proceedings, custody of the children was granted to their aunt and uncle, Jane Clayton and her husband. After these unsettling events, an unimaginable tragedy struck that left everyone, especially the Kissel family, in shock. On April 3, 2006, Robert's brother, Andrew Kissel, was discovered with 5 stab wounds to his neck. The eerie similarity to Robert's murder raised chilling questions. It seemed someone had tried to end their lives in a hauntingly similar manner with the same method of attack. The mystery deepened, leaving everyone puzzled. Could these murders and attempts be connected? Was Nancy Kissel really the killer, or was someone targeting the Kissel family? Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. A Louisiana man who spent more than half his life on the run has now been apprehended after 30 years on the FBI's most wanted list. 63-year-old Greg Lawson was located in Huatulco, Mexico, and was brought back to U.S. soil on September 19, 2023. Lawson had been in the middle of a trial for gunning down his childhood best friend, Seth Garlington, on April 24, 1990, when he just left the county courthouse before the jury had come back with their verdict. In 2007, the FBI announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Greg Lawson, and 3 decades passed before credible tip cashed in that reward. In coordination with law enforcement in Mexico, the FBI located Lawson, who had been using the identity of a deceased man from Alabama, and were able to swiftly arrest Lawson, who apparently laughed as he was being cuffed. Once back in Louisiana, Lawson was charged with an additional felony for bail jumping, and he is being held at the Claiborne Parish Detention Center while he awaits further court proceedings. Douglas A. Williams Jr., special agent in charge of FBI New Orleans, said in a statement, quote, "We want to thank our partners and the public in this case, who never gave up hope that justice could be served for Mr. Lawson's victim. There's no doubt that Mr. Lawson might still be in the wind if our partners in Mexico had not been willing to deal with this so swiftly." On July 23, 2023, one of Canada's most wanted fugitives was located and arrested in a Detroit, Michigan suburb. In a coordinated arrest, Malik Kalu was extradited back to Windsor, Ontario in connection to the 2022 drive-by shooting that killed 24-year-old Daniel Squalls. Malik Kalu was a semi-professional basketball player who played in the junior teams, but never made it to the NBA, unlike his brother Maurice Kalu. At the time of the murder, Malik was 26 years old. Kalu was on the run for 9 months. Video surveillance had placed him at the scene of the crime. Kalu had also been on release for another violent crime, which Windsor police have stated is another reason to keep violent offenders in custody while awaiting further court proceedings. He had been added to the Canadian Be on the Lookout or BOLO program's top 25 most wanted fugitives. In his time on the run, there had been a $6,000 reward for information leading to his arrest, and it is unclear if it was a tip that located him. Daniel Squall's mother, Taylina, said of the arrest, quote, "I shouted, I jumped, I cried. I'm just so excited now. Daniel's finally going to get some justice." It appears the shooting may have been prompted by a custody disagreement. Daniel Squall was with a woman and his daughter, and the woman also had a child with Kalu. The family had recently informed Kalu of their relocating to the U.S., but because of Kalu's criminal history, he wouldn't be able to see his child freely. The lead detective on the case, Staff Sergeant Joe Faddle, said in addition to the surveillance footage, there is forensic evidence that directly ties Kalu to the crime scene. He also stated that he may seek additional charges for anyone who aided Kalu while he was on the run. Quote, "There's no doubt in my mind that people have helped him evade capture for 9 months. This could not have been done by himself. We will continue this investigation into anybody who assists Mr. Kalu in any sort of way to avoid capture." The gun used in the murder was not found at the time of the arrest. For 2 years, 34-year-old Edgar Salvatore Cashin Garcia and 38-year-old Araceli Medina had been on the run after fleeing Washington state. The pair had been the first fugitive couple to appear on the U.S. Marshal's top 15 most wanted list. They were wanted for various crimes relating to child abuse allegations, and it sparked an international manhunt not just for them but also for their 5 children. The children were considered endangered. The situation began to unfold in 2020 when 2 little girls were discovered abandoned at a gas station in Tijuana, Mexico. The girls, aged 8 and 3, were taken into child protective custody, but the girls were extremely traumatized. It took child welfare experts 6 months to get the girls to trust them enough to explain what had happened to them. The girls were sisters, and they had continually asked officials if they had found their 7-year-old brother. The eldest girl eventually revealed their names and the extensive amount of physical and sexual torture used by Edgar Salvatore Cashin Garcia and Araceli Medina. Until recently, the 3 children had lived with their maternal grandmother. It had been who the 3 kids had always lived with until May 2020, when Cashin Garcia and Medina took custody of the 3. From there, the girls described the absolute hell that they had been faced with when they lived with the pair. They described being trafficked out to strange people, abused, and just unimaginable horrors. Law enforcement in Washington located the couple and began to investigate. When officers arrived at the family's apartment, Cashin Garcia told law enforcement that their son, the boy that the 2 girls had been desperate for police to find, was staying with relatives in California. However, the boy was not found, and when law enforcement went back to arrest the couple, they discovered that they had fled to Mexico. At the time of their escape, Medina had visitation of her 4 children from another relationship and her infant son with Cashin Garcia. The couple were initially wanted on first-degree sexual assault and 3 counts of assault of a child. However, on February 5, 2022, hikers found the skeletal remains of 7-year-old Edgar Jr., the missing child. Another charge was added to the warrant first-degree murder. Based on the evidence found on the remains and testimony from the other two girls, Edgar Jr. had been tortured to death and both physically and sexually abused by both Cashin Garcia and Medina, but also other individuals. Marshals elevated the fugitive investigation when Edgar Jr.'s remains were found, and there was a $20,000 cash reward for information leading to the couple's arrest. In February 2023, the reward was bumped up to $50,000, and it was only a few weeks later when law enforcement got a tip that would eventually lead to the couple's capture. On March 31, 2023, the couple were captured along with their 5 missing children. Detective John Davis of the Kennewick Police Department said of the situation, "This is the worst child abuse case I've come across in 9 years as a detective. What we've seen from this investigation, Garcia and Medina had no problem hurting children to outright murder. The crimes that Araceli Medina and Edgar Cashin Garcia are charged with are heinous, and we commend the unwavering dedication of law enforcement. This successful rescue is a testament to the critical importance of collaboration and community involvement in safeguarding our most vulnerable population." The duo were extradited back to Washington, where they now face their charges. No word yet on further court proceedings. They're being held in custody while they await further court appearances. Their bail has been set to $5 million each. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. It was in 2021 when Michael Anthony Baltimore was added to the U.S. Marshals' top 15 most wanted list. Baltimore had previously been on the reality TV show 90 Day Fiancé, in which he was featured as a barber at the GQ Barbershop in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Even featured on the show were his co-workers and boss, longtime friend and mentor, Kendall Jerome Cook. After the show had aired, however, Baltimore and Cook had a falling out, and on May 22, 2021, Baltimore went into the barbershop and opened fire, killing Cook and injuring another employee at the shop. Baltimore then fled, and the surviving victim had been able to positively identify Baltimore as the shooter. Baltimore was wanted on charges of assault, homicide, and parole violations. He had an extensive criminal history that went back to the 90s, and while on the run was considered armed and dangerous. It was later announced that there was a $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest, but it wasn't needed because 6 months after that announcement, Baltimore went into a restaurant in Davies, Florida, and started a physical altercation with another patron there. In the restaurant, an employee trying to break up the fight got hit in the face with the back of a knife, and the suspect fled claiming to be retrieving a gun. It was then that law enforcement was called. Baltimore fled, but was later arrested on January 20, 2023. Upon his arrest, he was fingerprinted, and it was then that Davie police realized they had wanted a fugitive in their custody. Baltimore had attempted to give officers a fake name. Also in his possession were drugs, a handgun, and 3 fake IDs. Michael Anthony Baltimore is being held in Florida where he faces charges there, and it's likely he will be extradited back to Pennsylvania to face the murder charge there as well. A war criminal wanted for his participation in the 1994 Rwandan genocide was recently discovered hiding in South Africa. Fulgence Kayishema had been on the run since 2001 when it was discovered that he had orchestrated the killing of more than 2,000 men, women, and children on April 15, 1994 at a church in Rwanda. An estimated 800,000 people were killed in 90 days in what is described as one of the most brutal genocides in human history. It was revealed that during the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwandans that Kayishema attempted to burn a church with 2,000 Tutsi people hiding inside. Failing to ignite the structure, he helped to use a bulldozer to collapse the building, killing all those who sought refuge inside. He was charged with genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, and crimes against humanity charges. However, when law enforcement went to arrest him, he had already fled. The United States government themselves had offered a $5 million reward for information leading to his arrest. For over 2 decades, multiple agencies worked tirelessly to find Kayishema, and it was while monitoring family members that they eventually had word that he was hiding in South Africa. Kayishema had been using a forged identity and was working on a grape farm in Cape Town. When he was discovered and arrested on May 19, 2023, He initially denied his identity but eventually said to arresting officers, "I've been waiting a long time to be arrested." Fulgence Kaishima was a fugitive for more than 20 years. His arrest ensures that he will finally face justice for his alleged crimes. IRMCT Chief Prosecutor Serge Brammertz, who led the investigation, said in a statement to the media, quote, "Genocide is the most serious crime known to humankind. The international community has committed to ensuring that its perpetrators will be prosecuted and punished. This arrest is a tangible demonstration that this commitment does not fade and that justice will be done, no matter how long it takes." Kaishima's arrest is the fifth in recent years of top officials. Agencies are still looking to arrest 3 more. Kaishima is being held in Cape Town custody while he awaits his trial and sentencing. He faces life in prison. On January 15, 2018, a British Airways flight arrived at London's Heathrow Airport from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. However, as the passengers disembarked, airport officials quickly realized an issue with one of them. This passenger, 66-year-old Marilyn Hartman, had arrived in London without any documentation, boarding pass, or passport. She didn't have a boarding pass because she had never purchased a ticket. Instead, Hartman had somehow managed to bypass British Airways ticket agents and security checkpoints in Chicago, boarding the plane without a pass. Hartman had simply walked on board and taken an empty seat without raising any concerns among the flight crew. Upon arrival in London, she was sent back to Chicago, where she was taken into custody and charged with felony theft for taking the flight without paying for a ticket, reportedly valued between $24,100 and $34,100. She was also charged with misdemeanor trespassing for entering the airport illegally. This incident was far from her first unauthorized airport entry or flight without a valid ticket. Authorities later compiled a list of dozens of similar incidents involving Hartman at various U.S. airports, though she claimed the total number was even higher, recounting numerous times she had boarded flights undetected. According to Hartman, her first successful attempt at boarding a flight without a ticket was in 2002 when she flew from Chicago to Copenhagen. She claimed to have taken another flight to Paris later that same year. Given her later difficulties in London, attempting to pass through customs and immigration without documentation, these claims of free international travel are met with skepticism. However, her domestic incidents are well documented. In 2009, she was arrested in Hawaii while using another woman's identity to try to board a flight without a ticket. She spent much of February-March of 2014 at San Francisco International Airport, coming into contact with police on 5 different occasions. On February 15th, Hartman successfully made it through security and onto a plane that was bound for Hawaii. She sat down in a seat on the plane, but when the person with the ticket assigning them to that seat came on board, the flight crew realized that Hartman did not have a boarding pass. Police interviewed her but released her. They did the same 3 days later when she was apprehended trying to get through a security gate. She was finally arrested 2 days after that, carrying someone else's discarded boarding pass and charged with trespassing. A court order prohibited Hartman from returning to San Francisco International unless she had a valid ticket for a flight. However, she was found eating at the food court in the airport's A on March 18th. She was arrested on suspicion of violating a court order and trespassing. She was again arrested for the same reasons on March 26th when police found her at the baggage claim in Terminal 3 of the airport. Hartman attracted national media attention in August of 2014 when she was arrested after successfully sneaking onto a plane and taking a flight from San Jose to Los Angeles. When she went before a judge, she was told Los Angeles. She was taken into custody and, this time, sentenced to 6 months in jail, but due to overcrowding, she was released after just 3 days. Hartman then went on to have similar multi-day interactions with police after getting through security at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport and Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. She was generally only given warnings after each incident, although she did eventually serve 3 days in jail for trespassing following her second incident in Minnesota. Hartman did face slightly more serious charges after turning up in Florida a short time later, reportedly after successfully flying there from Minnesota without a ticket. After landing at Jacksonville International Airport, she took a shuttle to the Omni Amelia Island Plantation Hotel, claiming to be a woman who was a registered guest there. At the hotel, she checked in under the same woman's reservation. This led to her being charged with fraud by impersonation, defrauding an innkeeper, and trespassing. Her public defenders were able to get her felony fraud charge dropped down to a misdemeanor, and Hartman was released after they had her declared mentally unstable. After leaving Florida, Hartman returned to Chicago, which appears to be her hometown. There are few concrete details available about Hartman's early life. She appears to have been born Marilyn Stahl and legally changed her last name to Hartman in 1985. She grew up on the south side of Chicago and attended Chicago Vocational High School, where she was a member of the National Honor Society and the chorus. She graduated in 1969, and within a few years, she was no longer in contact with anyone from her family. She reportedly has 3 brothers who have not heard from her since the early 1970s and who do not like to publicly speak about her at all, much less in any detail. Hartman claims to have grown up in a violent home with mentally ill family members. Although these statements are difficult to corroborate, an important factor in Hartman's behavior to consider is the fact that she is mentally ill, although the exact nature of her illness is not publicly known. Legal documents state that she suffers from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, and she has stated that she has bipolar disorder. She further stated in court in 2022 that she has struggled with depression and medication management throughout her life. Hartman also has a conspiratorial worldview, which plays into her explanation as to why she continues to sneak into airports and onto airplanes. While corresponding with journalist Joe Ashkenazi for a 2015 article he wrote about her, Hartman detailed what she believed to be an elaborate plot against her that compelled her to attempt to get past airport security and onto planes without tickets and had resulted in her various legal troubles. Hartman claimed that the conspiracy against her began in 1990 when she exposed a Chicago lawyer working with a retired FBI agent to fix cases. Her actions resulted in ongoing retribution, which led to her becoming homeless on various occasions and committing her criminal actions at airports. She diagnosed herself with and apparently created what she called whistleblower trauma syndrome. She told Ashkenazi that the condition resulted in a severe fight or flight reaction, which, in her case, literally made her feel the need to get on a flight to get away. She would say in a different interview several years later that she was always in a depressed state of mind when she snuck onto planes. According to Hartman, numerous people, including President Obama, were in on the conspiracy. She claimed she did not evade security checks at the various airports. Rather, TSA agents let her through. She further claimed that sometimes plane tickets will be left for her to find, and airport staff would let her use them but then take her into custody once she was in a secure area of the airport. According to Hartman, the goal of this conspiracy was to land her in prison for an extended period of time, a belief that does not seem to align with reality, given the dozens of times she has been released with little to no punishment following her various incidents at airports. The purpose of highlighting this case on this channel is not to malign Marilyn Hartman specifically or individuals with mental illness in general. Rather, it is to draw attention to 2 major issues her case highlights: airport security and how the legal system handles individuals with mental illnesses. While someone managing to get past airport security in a post-9/11 world sounds like it should not only be impossible, but of major concern should it occur, the Transportation Security Administration and several aviation experts, who have been consulted for articles about Hartman's case, have downplayed the security implications it has. After Hartman successfully flew from San Jose to Los Angeles without a ticket, the TSA claimed that the incident was not a security concern, because while Hartman had not been checked for a boarding pass at security, she had been screened for prohibited items, meaning she had no way of bringing any sort of weapon on board. They maintained that the incident only illustrated the need for minor changes to their document examination procedures to ensure people without boarding passes could not get through security checkpoints. While there are no indications that Hartman illegally boarded planes with any plans to commit any sort of nefarious acts, that does not change the fact that the holes in security and procedure she exploited with simple techniques could also be exploited by individuals with more malicious intentions. Hartman employed unsophisticated tactics by blending in with large family groups at security and covering her face with her hair at airports where she was a repeat recent offender and known to airport staff. If she could find success with so little planning or effort, a more methodical and motivated mind could presumably have even more success than Hartman. The fact that potential criminals would most likely still have to be screened for prohibited items before sneaking onto a plane does not necessarily ensure that the public is safe. Just because a criminal does not plan on committing a violent act while a plane is in the air does not mean that the ability to travel domestically without record or have easy undocumented access to secure areas of airports could not potentially benefit them in their criminal activities. As a nonviolent offender suffering from mental illness, Hartman falls into somewhat of a gray area, according to psychology and psychiatry professor Stephen Hinshaw, cited by Joe Eskenazi in his article on Hartman. It has become more and more difficult to have individuals confined to mental health facilities against their will. While this is a great victory for individual civil, it also means that some of the people most in need of help and treatment are unable to get it. While Hartman should not necessarily be forced into treatment, Hartman's case raises the important legal issue of if and when the courts should be allowed to order individuals to undergo treatment for their mental health, especially in regards to offenders who have not caused physical harm to others. Hartman was required to undergo various mental health evaluations throughout her criminal career and was at times placed in voluntary treatment facilities, although she generally quickly left them. In recent years, while she has operated largely in just one jurisdiction, Hartman has been compelled into long-term treatment at different times, which did result in her various incidents at airports becoming fewer and farther between. Especially early on in her career as a serial stowaway, authorities felt sorry for Hartman because of her apparent mental health issues, which played a role in her being given such lenient sentences in the situations where she faced repercussions for her actions at all. Individuals suffering from mental illness should of course be treated with compassion, but Hartman's case raises the question of whether it is truly compassionate to release individuals in need of treatment, knowing that they will most likely reoffend since the issues that led them to committing crimes in the first place have not been addressed. After leaving Florida following the conclusion of the legal proceedings against her there, Hartman appears to have largely remained in the Chicago area. She was involved in at least 9 incidents involving trespassing and attempting to enter secure areas at both O'Hare and Midway airports, including her flight to London without a ticket. In one incident, she did purchase a valid ticket but had been removed from the plane, which was taking off at Midway because she caused a disturbance. She was charged with misdemeanor reckless conduct. The following day, she went to O'Hare, where airport staff detained her after she attempted to get through security without a ticket. Hartman had only received 18 months of probation for the trespassing and theft charges stemming from her ticketless flight to London. Just 7 months after she received that sentence, however, she was back at an airport in violation of the terms of her probation, involved in the incident that has resulted in her most recent legal troubles. On October 11, 2019, Hartman was seen by police attempting to get through one of the security checkpoints at O'Hare International Airport. She had already made it through the first checkpoint with no ticket. She was taken into custody and charged with felony trespassing. This time, she was held without bond. Hartman was eventually placed into a mental health facility, and her lawyers negotiated a plea deal. On March 16, 2021, just 2 weeks after they reached that agreement and before it was finalized in court, Hartman fled the mental health facility, where she had been ordered to stay. She had also been ordered to wear an electronic monitoring device, so authorities were able to track her movements. She again attempted to enter O'Hare International Airport. She was taken into custody at the airport's public transportation station. Hartman would later claim that she ran away because she was upset over the early release of an interview she had given in the local media. She had been given written assurances that it would not be broadcast until after her court cases were complete, but this did not end up being the case. She escaped the facility 2 days after it actually aired. In court, her lawyer would argue that the escape had been in response to something Hartman had no control over, the early release of the interview. On March 3, 2022, Hartman appeared in court and pleaded guilty to felony counts of criminal trespass and escape from electronic monitoring. The escape charge was in relation to her running away from the mental health facility in 2021, and the criminal trespass charge was in relation to the 2019 incident that had resulted in her being placed in the facility. The judge sentenced Hartman to 18 months in prison on the trespassing charge and to 2 years in prison on the escape charge, with the 2 sentences to be served consecutively. Hartman was given credit for approximately 2 years 5 months already spent in custody. The facility she escaped from in 2021 agreed to let her return there for her court-ordered period of supervised release and mental health treatment. Hopefully, this time, her treatment will finally result in her long-term success and keep her out of the courtroom and the airport. It was on July 13, 2019 in Cayuga Heights, a small community located on the outskirts of Ithaca, New York, when a custody battle turned heated. At the center were 4-year-old Paisley Schultz and her older sister, who was already school age. The older sister was picked up from school by her maternal grandmother and aided by a social worker and police escort. They headed over to the biological parents' home to get Paisley, but when they arrived, the home was empty. The parents, Kimberly Cooper and Kirk D. Schultz Jr., had long since been believed to be the abductors of Paisley, and several properties were searched, but no sign of the child was found. They had lost their custody battle when a babysitter came forward with some concerns about the children's well-being in the home. Kirk Schultz was later arrested and charged with possession of methamphetamines and heroin. Prior to the abduction, Cooper and Schultz had already lost 2 daughters in infancy prior to Paisley's birth. However, their causes of death are unknown, though it is speculated that this has also contributed to them losing custody. The babysitter also alleged that the girls were often taken with their parents to work to dangerous job sites. They owned Schultz Paving, and if they couldn't afford childcare, they just brought the girls with them, often as late as midnight and without supervision. She also alleged that both parents used illicit substances while caring for the girls on the job operating machinery and while driving. Law enforcement repeatedly questioned Schultz Jr. and his father, and both had been adamant that they didn't know where Kimberly was and that they believed she had taken Paisley to Philadelphia. Officers had been allowed voluntary entry to the homes nearly 24 times, but they weren't allowed access to search the basement or the bedrooms. No sign of Kimberly secured a search warrant for the whole property and descended. Officers had been searching for an hour when one detective noticed something not feeling right about a staircase that descended to the basement of the home. He inspected further and noticed that the stairs had a small crack that revealed something inside, and using a flashlight, he saw what appeared to be little feet underneath. The floor was ripped open and revealed a small makeshift opening dug into the foundation of the home. The room had a dirt floor, was wet, and smelt of mold and human waste, and a pile of filthy soaked blankets was Kimberly Cooper, holding her now 6-year-old Paisley Schultz. Kimberly Cooper, Schultz Jr., and Sr. were taken into custody and charged with felony custodial interference in the 1st degree and a misdemeanor endangering the welfare of a child. Cooper also faced additional felony charges related to the abduction. All have pleaded not guilty. Paisley was taken to the hospital, where it was said that she was deemed healthy and returned to the care of her maternal grandmother and older sister. Experts have said there's still a long road ahead for Paisley's journey. She hasn't been to school. She is quite behind in terms of learning and has had a very limited experience from being confined to one house for so long. It isn't believed that Paisley was confined to under the stairs, and she did have her own bedroom within the home. The under the stairs was simply used as a stowaway area to wait out whenever law enforcement came to the property. Law enforcement said on the matter, quote, "I understand as a parent, no one wants to lose custody of their children, but sometimes the right thing for us to do for our children is the hardest thing to do for our children. What they should have done in 2019 when custody was granted to a third party, they should have relinquished the child rather than run and hide." An episode of Netflix's Unsolved Mystery was the reason that now 15-year-old Kayla was reunited with her father after being abducted in 2017 by her mother, Heather. Back on July 5, 2017. The then 9-year-old was abducted from South Elgin, Illinois after a scheduled visit with her mom. Heather didn't have full custody of Kayla and had been during one of her weekly visitations that she fled with Kayla. Heather had told friends that she had a camping trip planned with Kayla, and neighbors recalled seeing her packing her vehicle with a bunch of things. When Kayla's father, Ryan Ozurka, went to pick her up, the duo was no longer there. Heather had expressed a desire to live off the grid and had already been in violation of their custody agreement when she took Kayla out of state without the court's permission. A felony kidnapping warrant was issued for the pair, as well as Heather's car, but they weren't immediately located. Heather's phone and all of her social media had been deactivated, and it seemed as though it had been a well-thought-out abduction. For 6 years, Ryan Ozurka worked tirelessly to find his daughter. Her cold case was briefly featured on Unsolved Mysteries in an episode dedicated to parental kidnapping cold cases. Her picture had been only on the screen for 4 seconds, but it was enough for a local store owner to recognize the now teenager. While at a shopping mall in Asheville, North Carolina, on May 13, 2023, Heather and Kayla were approached by mall security. When law enforcement arrived, the pair gave false names. The pair were detained until they were able to positively identify the pair. Heather has been held in custody on a $250,000 bond, and Kayla was reunited with her father. Ryan Iserka made this emotional statement to the media, quote, "I'm overjoyed that Kayla is home safe. I want to thank the South Elgin Police Department, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and all the law enforcement agencies who assisted with her case. I also want to thank all the followers on the Bring Kayla Home Facebook page who helped keep her story alive and were instrumental in spreading awareness. We ask for privacy as we get to know each other again and navigate this new beginning." Heather Unbehund is being extradited to Illinois, where she is expected to be charged with felony child abduction. Richard Wayne Landers Jr. was only 5 years old when he was abducted in 1994 from Wolcottville, Indiana, by his paternal grandparents. Landers Jr. appeared to have always lived with his grandparents along with his parents, but when the two had split up, Landers Jr. was the subject of a long and bitter custody battle. Ultimately, temporary full custody was awarded to his mother, Lisa Harder. There are reports that Harder had been homeless, but at the time of the final custody hearing, she had secured an apartment and was equipped to take custody and care of her son. However, the grandparents disagreed, and the morning they had been mandated to hand over Lanier Jr., they took off. For 2 decades, the case sat cold, with neither Richard Lanier Sr. nor Harder having contact with their son. The grandparents, Richard and Ruth Landers, had a warrant out for their arrest for the abduction, but they weren't heard from for years. And over the years, his parents never gave up hope on finding their son. His pictures were sent out locally and nationally multiple times throughout the years, and charges against the grandparents were elevated. On 20th anniversary of the abduction, the cold case was reopened and law enforcement obtained Richard's social security card. It was discovered that a man in Minnesota was using the same number with a different name, but the same age and birthday. Only weeks after the anniversary, a 24-year-old man was identified as Richard Landers Jr., now married with children of his own. The grandparents were also found living in Browerville, Minnesota, and had been living under assumed names. Upon their arrest, they confessed to being Richard and Ruth Lander. It appears that Lander Jr. was, or at least is now, fully aware of the situation and has forgiven his grandparents. He believes that they had the best intentions for him and believed that they did the right thing for him. The grandparents were not charged, as the original charges were dropped in 2008. The community that the three had settled in were shocked by the news and stated that the family had kept to themselves mostly and were quiet. Both of the parents of Landers Jr. have made contact with their son and are working towards moving forward with cultivating a relationship. The father has told the media that he forgives his parents and is just grateful his son is alive and well, and he still has an opportunity to get to know him. It was in 2002 when Greg Allen's life changed forever. On the trail of what had been a messy divorce, and even messier custody battle for his 4-year-old daughter, Sabrina, things had just started to look up. Greg, an engineering scientist, had been granted primary custody, and after months of fighting with his ex-wife, Dara, things had just started to get easier. They were falling into a good routine, and the parents were beginning the road to cooperative co-parenting. Greg brought Sabrina to her mom on April 19, 2002 for the weekend. It had been agreed upon that Darla would return Sabrina on Sunday evening, but she never showed up. Greg recalled the last goodbye before the drop-off, and Sabrina had looked up at him and said, "Daddy, don't ever forget me." At the time, he thought it had been a silly little exchange, but it turned into an almost sinister warning. In the early stages of the divorce, Dar had often threatened to take Sabrina away. Dar was from Mexico and had wanted to return there with Sabrina since the beginning of their divorce. When Greg was granted primary custody, the courts had agreed that Sabrina would stay in Texas. There had been several wild attempts during the divorce to convince the little girl to lie in order to be granted protective orders from Greg. Sabrina had even been taken from school once by Child Protective Services when she allegedly told social worker, "My daddy hits my mommy. That's a lie my mommy told me to say." Greg called the police 2 hours after the time of drop-off had passed. He'd made several attempts to reach Dara, but all efforts went to voicemail. But by then, it was too late, and Dara and Sabrina were long gone. In addition to the police and Texas Rangers, Greg also hired a private detective. They tracked their whereabouts to the Texas-Mexican border, and they were able to confirm that Dara and Sabrina had purchased bus tickets to Mexico. Greg alerted all of the missing children's agencies and started his own website to generate tips. He also took a leave of absence from his job and went to Mexico City, where he tried to search for his daughter himself. Greg quickly learned that his lack of Spanish skills was holding him back, so he enrolled in an immersive Spanish class to learn the language as quickly as possible. Greg had been in Mexico for almost a year when he got his first solid tip. A teacher reached out to him and said that she'd met a student who she believed was his daughter. She was blonde, the same age, and didn't speak much Spanish. She'd been called Blanca because of her fair hair, and the teacher said that Blanca had been extremely distressed. She would get upset because she didn't understand the other children and begged the teacher to help her find her daddy in Texas. Only then did teacher look online and see Greg's website. She had looked Greg up and was shocked to discover that Greg was only 30 minutes away from his daughter. Greg bought the information to the U.S. police and officers in Mexico, but because of the need to coordinate by the time both agencies worked out a game plan, Dar had taken Sabrina out of the school and relocated. Greg was devastated, but continued the search for his daughter. He stayed in Mexico, took every opportunity to get his case in the media, and offered a $20,000 reward for information. Greg eventually remarried. He had fallen in love with the woman teaching him Spanish, and the couple married after 3 years. They now have 3 children together. 12 years after his daughter had been kidnapped, there was a new tip brought in from one of the private investigators Greg had hired. They located Dara in a small town outside Mexico City. They staked at the apartment for 2 weeks until they confirmed what appeared to be a teenage girl in the apartment. She had dark hair and was now 17, but showed no signs of physical harm. This time officers moved quickly. They arrested Dara and had Sabrina. She was put on a plane and sent back to the U.S. Sabrina had not gone to school since 2003, had her blonde hair dyed dark to conceal her identity, and had not been allowed to leave the apartment for fear of being recognized. Dara had undergone several operations to also change her appearance. Sabrina was not immediately released to Greg and his family. She underwent extensive therapy to work through the many traumas she'd experienced for the last 12 years. She'd been confused and frightened about the relocation, and the years of hearing bad things about her father made her not want to see Greg. In fact, she'd been told he had committed suicide and abandoned her. Eventually, with family trauma counseling, they were able to rekindle their relationship, and Sabrina moved into Greg's home that he shared with his wife, Mariana, and their children. Dara was extradited back to the U.S., where a judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison for aggravated kidnapping and interfering with child custody. Dara's sister also testified against her sister, citing strange, unhinged behavior, such as writing to their elderly mother, pretending to be their deceased father. Greg said in a statement, quote, "Sorry for all the silence, but we have been necessarily focused on healing. The past year has been quite a roller coaster ride, but I like to think that we are past the hardest parts. I'm happy to report that I have a strong and growing relationship with my daughter, and we still have trials ahead, but we are doing well." Nestled in Idaho's heart, Moscow offers an ideal blend of vibrant student life and close-knit community spirit. Known for its student-friendly vibe, the city thrives around the renowned University of Idaho, fostering a setting where academics and lively collegiate culture intersect. The neighborhoods around campus bustle with students living in hostels, rented university properties, and nearby homes. While Moscow is famed for its academic environment, students would sometimes gather covertly with friends and loved ones, though these occasions were typically uneventful. Yet, on the chilling night of November 13, 2022, for university students faced a tragic turn of events while unwinding after a party, shattering the peaceful night they had expected in their 3-story home. This story centers on 4 individuals from the University of Idaho. 20-year-old Ethan Chapin from Conway, Washington. 21-year-old Kaylee Gonzaves from Rathdrum, Idaho. 20-year-old Xana Kernadle from Post Falls, Idaho. And 21-year-old Madison Mogan from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Ethan was a freshman, Xana a junior, and both Kaylee and Madison were seniors. Ethan James Chapin, the oldest of triplets, was born on a picturesque Tuesday evening of October 29, 2002, at 4:43 p.m. at Swedish Hospital in Seattle. His siblings, Maisie and Hunter, arrived moments later, at 4:44 and 4:45, respectively. Initially residing in Olympia at Summit Lake, the family spent the initial year and a half there before relocating to Conway. The children attended Conway School, receiving excellent education while actively participating in soccer, basketball, and cross-country. Ethan cherished fond moments of playing basketball alongside his brother at Conway, adorned in their team jerseys. Subsequently, Ethan enrolled at Mount Vernon High School, yet his on-campus schooling or normal schooling was disrupted by the onset of the COVID pandemic. Alongside his siblings, Ethan transitioned to Idaho, working at Hills Resort before attempting to resume studies at MVHS, which remained affected. They later worked at Tulip Town during the tulip season before returning to Hills Resort in Idaho for summer employment, just before commencing their stint at the University of Idaho. In August 2021, Ethan's family embarked on a journey to the University of Idaho to drop off their 3 children to college. Both Ethan and Hunter joined the fraternity Sigma Chi, while Mazzy became part of the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority. Since beginning his studies at the University of Idaho, Ethan embraced a vibrant social life, engaged in intramural sports, and managed his academic responsibilities. He continued his passion for sports and also developed a romantic relationship with Xana Kernadle during this time. Xana Alexia Kernadle was born on July 5, 2002 at Kootenai Health Hospital in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and grew up in Post Falls. Her early years were marked by her talent as a gymnast, showcasing her skills from a young age. Throughout her schooling at Post Falls Middle and High School, Xana actively participated in volleyball, track, and soccer until her graduation in 2020. Alongside her studies, she also worked at Texas Roadhouse. Upon enrolling at the University of Idaho, Xana pursued a major in marketing while immersing herself in extracurricular activities, notably as an engaged member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority and the Vandal Solutions sales team. Juggling these commitments, she also held a part-time position at the Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow, Idaho. Beyond her academic and professional pursuits, Xana found joy in her dog, Shoeshine, cherished moments at EDM concerts, Rel is spending quality time with friends, and eagerly embarked on family trips with her sister and father. Her childhood was filled with fond memories of her grandparents' farm and summers spent by the river. Xana's vibrant personality made her deeply loved by her family, friends, and classmates. Known for her positive and outgoing nature, she had a special ability to make everyone feel included. Her zest for life, infectious humor, and unwavering enthusiasm made an indelible mark on all who had the privilege of knowing her. Now Xana's co-occupant during her time at the University of Idaho, Madison May Mogan, was born on May 25, 2001 in Eugene, Oregon. She brought immense joy to her family and all around her from the very beginning. After spending her initial 2 years in Oregon, Madison's family relocated to the North Idaho region where her parents had their roots. Her upbringing in Idaho was nothing short of wonderful. Beginning her education at Winton Elementary, she later transitioned to Coeur d'Alene Charter Academy before ultimately choosing to enroll in LCHS, a decision she made after articulating her reasons in a decisive letter alongside her lifelong friend, who was practically her sister, Kaylee. It was evident to everyone who knew her that Maddie's endearing personality made her feel immensely loved. Her unique, offbeat, and humorous approach brought smile and laughter to others, and it was a well-known fact that keeping her well-fed was essential. Maddie was respected for her determination and commitment to her future endeavors. Excelling in academics and every job she undertook during high school and college, She built a network of friends, colleagues, supervisors, and teachers who admired her work ethic, care, and dedication. Excited about her academic pursuit at the University of Idaho, though a little farther from home, Maddie thrived, consistently earning a spot on the dean's list each semester. Joining Pi Beta Phi, she formed enduring bonds with close friends and also cherished having Kaylee alongside. Additionally, she found love with a boy named Jake, who held a special place in her heart. Now Maddie's best friend, Kaylee Jade Gonzalez, was born in Concord, California on June 8, 2001. Even before her arrival, she was a radiant spark for her parents, Steve and Christy Gonzalez. As the third child, Kaylee brought a unique energy with her, born with distinctive black thick curls, a charming button nose, and a perfectly round porcelain face adorned with a mysterious tiny scar on her forehead. Teased by her siblings about her horns, she remained a spirited and cherished middle child among her 5 siblings. Around the age of 1, Kaylee and her family relocated to North Idaho, where her vibrant personality flourished. Growing into a beautiful, authentic, and social individual, she adored Claire's fashion accessories and had an innate talent for eliciting laughter from those around her. Her educational journey began at Bora Elementary alongside her older brother and sister before transitioning to Charter Academy for middle school, where she crossed paths with Maddie Mogul, making the start of an inseparable bond. From that day forward, their lives intertwined, transforming their family of 5 into a family of 6. Despite initial hesitations from her parents, Kaylee attended Lake City High School before venturing out to the University of Idaho alongside Maddie. Joining the Alpha Phi sorority, she pursued her aspirations of becoming an elementary school teacher. Throughout her academic years, Kaylee demonstrated remarkable scholastic achievements, complemented by her ability to effortlessly make friends wherever she went. Her social, quirky, and infectious personality often infused a sense of humor and a hint of mischief into her interactions. Enthusiastic about adventure and pranks, she balanced her studies with a full-time job, showcasing her diligent work ethic. During their tenure at the University of Idaho, Madison and Zana resided together in a rental home located in close proximity to the university campus. Kaylee had previously been a resident of the same house, but had recently moved out. However, on the evening of November 12, 2022, Kaylee returned to the residence to attend a nearby party. Earlier on the evening of November 12th, 2 of the 4 students, Ethan and Xana, were present at an on-campus gathering organized by the nearby Sigma Chi fraternity, which lasted from 8 to 9 p.m. Subsequently, they arrived back home, which was the rented house at 1:45 a.m. Meanwhile, the remaining 2 individuals, close friends, Maddie and Kayla, had spent their evening at the Corner Club, a downtown sports bar, arriving at 10 p.m. and departing around 1:30 a.m. By 1:56 a.m., all 4 individuals had indeed returned to the shared rental house. Moreover, the building accommodated 2 additional students who resided on the ground floor, sharing the space with them. All of them retired to bed for the night. One of the residents, Dylan Mortensen, stayed on the ground floor. Maddie and Kaylee shared a bed, while the other residents stayed on the same floor, but in a separate room adjacent to theirs, and Xana and Ethan shared Xana's bed. During the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, one of the residents, apart from the aforementioned, who was asleep on Maddie and Kaylee's floor, was awakened by sounds resembling Xana and her dog. She even sensed hearing Xana saying, "There's someone here." Meanwhile, Dylan on the ground floor, upon hearing unusual sounds, opened her room door twice to investigate. During the second instance, she discerned what appeared to be cries emanating from Xana's room, accompanied by a male voice reassuring, "It's okay. I'm going to help you." Curiosity compelled her to open the door a third time, revealing a figure draped in black attire and a mask covering their mouth and nose, advancing in her direction. The unfamiliar individual, unnoticed by Dylan, proceeded past her and utilized the sliding glass door to depart. Stricken by a state of shock, she stood frozen momentarily, eventually seeking safety by locking herself within her room. No calls to 911 were immediately made. However, At 11:58 a.m. on November 13, 2022, hours following the incident, a call was finally placed from within the residence, utilizing a roommate's cell, requesting aid for an unconscious individual. Upon police arrival, they discovered the home's door open with no signs of forced entry or internal damage. Nothing seemed to be missing from the premises. Both the roommates were inside when the authorities arrived. However, the police made a grisly and distressing discovery. The heartbreaking truth unfolded. Zana, Ethan, Maddie, and Kaylee had been fatally stabbed while in their respective beds on the second and third floors of the home. The victims were found without restraints or gags, and blood spatters stained the walls at the scene. Maddie and Kaylee were located in Maddie's bedroom, while Zana and Ethan were discovered in Zana's room. However, the lingering question remained. Why did the killer spare the lives of the two roommates? Homicide detective Phil Waters speculated that the assailant may not have noticed Dylan or the other girl in the darkness. However, this assumption cannot be unequivocally regarded as the absolute truth. At present, it's the closest explanation available, pending further investigation and evidence. Maddie and Kaylee at 1:41 a.m. engaged in conversation and displaying smiles. 10 minutes later, they acquired their food and departed, initially presumed to have taken an Uber ride home, covering the distance of approximately 1 mile. 7 unsuccessful phone calls were registered from Kaylee's phone to her ex-boyfriend, a fellow student, between 2:26 and 2:52 a.m. Additionally, Maddie attempted to contact Kaylee's former boyfriend 3 times during a similar time frame, from 2:44 to 2:52 a.m., all resulting in unanswered calls. These calls underwent investigation, with police ultimately concluding that they did not consider the recipient of those missed calls to be involved in the crime. Following a forensic examination of Zana's cell phone, records indicated her activity on the TikTok app at 4:12 a.m. Additionally, security cameras positioned near the residence captured audio recordings of whimpering, a notable loud thud, and repeated barking from a dog, commencing approximately at 4:17 a.m. Detectives deduced that the tragic killings took place within a window of time estimated to be between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. On the evening following the tragic events of November 13th, the university made the decision to cancel classes for November 14th. Furthermore, they arranged a candlelight vigil initially planned to be held on the UI administration building lawn for the evening of November 16th, which was subsequently postponed for 2 weeks. Initially, investigators stated that there appeared to be no immediate risk to the community following the day of the killings. However, 3 days later, Moscow Police Chief James Fry revised the assessment stating, "We cannot definitively assess." However, in response to the initial assurances provided by the police being met with skepticism and concern from many residents and other Moscow residents regarding their safety, an early Thanksgiving holiday exodus from the area began. Some individuals who chose to remain were understandably anxious and exercised caution, leading several professors to cancel their classes during this period. The fathers of Kaylee Gonzalez and Ethan Chapin expressed criticism concerning the restricted information flow from both the police and the university to the families of the victims. Additionally, a wave of speculation and misinformation about the case emerged on social media, propagated by individuals on platforms like TikTok, self-identified psychics, and various other social media users. In response to this escalating situation, the Moscow Police Department rebuked internet sleuths for their involvement in generating widespread online rumors and disrupting the ongoing investigations. In a news release issued on December 2nd, they highlighted the speculative nature of the information circulating without factual substantiation, which was fueling community anxieties and disseminating falsehoods. The Lattic County coroner conducted autopsies on the 4 victims on November 17, 2022, revealing that all had sustained multiple stab wounds, particularly fatal ones inflicted on the chest and upper body. The nature of the wounds indicated that a large knife or very similar ones had been used in the attacks. Additionally, at least one victim displayed defensive wounds on their hands, suggesting attempts to fend off the assailant, with the possibility that others also made similar efforts. Disturbingly, the victims may have been attacked while they were asleep in their beds. However, no evidence suggested any form of assault in the tragic deaths. The coroner unequivocally declared all 4 deaths as homicides resulting from stabbing, yet none of the victims were found tied or gagged. Despite thorough investigations, no weapon has been recovered. Law enforcement authorities appealed to the public for any video footage captured at the residence on the night of the tragic incident. To facilitate the collection of potential evidence, a phone tip line and email address were established, encouraging students and other individuals to submit any relevant information to the authorities. During a press conference held on November 23, 2022, the Moscow police chief disclosed that authorities had received several tips, one of which suggested that Kaylee might have had a stalker. However, at that point, law enforcement officials were unable to substantiate or confirm the reliability of that claim, nor were they able to identify any individual fitting the description of the potential stalker. By December 5, 2022, the response from the public was substantial, with more than 26,100 tips submitted via duct email, approximately 27,100 phone calls received, an additional 1,000 digital media submissions through these designated tip lines. Subsequently, on December 24, 2022, the investigative team disclosed that they had amassed a staggering count of at least 15,000 tips pertaining to the case from various sources and members of the public. Initially, the police did not rule out the possibility of there being more than one perpetrator involved in the tragic incident. Authorities expressed their belief that the attack was potentially targeted. However, they had yet to determine definitively whether the target was the residence itself or its occupants. After receiving numerous tips from the public, on December 15, 2022, the police announced their intention to scrutinize records involving approximately 22,000 fifth-generation Hyundai Elantras manufactured between 2011 and 2013. Surveillance footage from the area had captured video evidence of an Elantra present around the time of the tragic incident. Investigators observed that this vehicle had made multiple passes along the same route in close proximity to the residence. Another surveillance recording, acquired by investigators, depicted an Elantra passing by the victim's home 3 times, commencing around 3:29 a.m. Subsequently, at 4:04 a.m., the Elantra returned to the residence for a 4th time. Notably, at 4:20 a.m., the same car was observed speeding away from the victim's neighborhood. Some days later, the investigators finally tracked the ownership of the Elantra vehicle to a local resident, Brian Koberger, who had driven it along with his father to the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania for the holiday season. He and his father were pulled over by the police for tailgating. During their journey, Brian Koberger was pulled over again by the Indiana State Police on Interstate 70 outside Greenfield, Indiana, for infractions of speeding and tailgating. However, the FBI refuted allegations that they had directed the Indiana State Police to conduct these stops. Subsequently, when investigators dug deeper into Koberger's whereabouts, they acquired cell phone data indicating Koberger's phone had ceased connecting to the network around 2:47 a.m. in Pullman on November 13, 2022 before reconnecting at approximately 4:48 a.m. near Blaine, Idaho, an area near U.S. Highway 95 south of Moscow. Further cell phone data revealed that Koberger's phone accessed a cell tower in close proximity to the victim's residence at around 9 a.m. on November 13, 2022, roughly 5 hours after the tragic incident occurred. Moreover, police obtained data indicating that his phone had pinged from the cell phone tower nearest to the residence at least 12 times between June 2022 and November 13, 2022. However, this was not all. In addition to this evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from the crime scene that did not match the DNA of any of the victims. This DNA was discovered on a tan leather knife sheath found on Maddie's bed. Authorities utilized a public genealogy database, which led them to a partial match with an individual having a familial connection to Koberger. Subsequently, investigators pursued this lead and successfully traced the DNA evidence to Koberger by matching it with DNA retrieved from the trash collected at his family's residence in Pennsylvania. Investigators proceeded to surveil Koberger outside his parents' residence in Pennsylvania. During surveillance, Koberger was observed on multiple occasions wearing surgical gloves and placing trash bags into a neighbor's garbage can. Subsequently, the items retrieved from the trash were sent to the Idaho State Lab for further testing as part of the investigation. Authorities also noted that Kohberger had meticulously cleaned his vehicle, thoroughly addressing both the interior and exterior, ensuring that no area was overlooked or left uncleaned. On December 30th, 2022, 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger was apprehended, unveiling comprehensive details about his background and personal information. The Federal Bureau of Investigation detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania on a warrant for murder. Brian Christopher Kohberger was born on November 21, 1994, hailed from Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Raised in Pennsylvania with his parents, Michael and Mary, and two sisters, Amanda and Melissa, Kohberger's online presence was limited until his arrest. His academic pursuits primarily focused on criminality and psychology, aligning with his family's inclination towards education, especially in psychology-related fields. He graduated from Pleasant Valley High School in 2013 and attended Monroe Career and Technical Institute in Bartonsville, but dropped out a year later. Kohberger pursued an associate degree in psychology at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, which he obtained in 2018. After his graduation, he secured a position as a security guard within the Pleasant Valley School District, where his father had previously held a maintenance role for an extended period, and his mother had served as a substitute teacher for a while. While at work, Kohberger's proactive response during a colleague's medical emergency garnered local attention in Pennsylvania. However, before this, his high school years were marked by weight-related bullying. Kohberger underwent a significant weight loss, transforming his appearance and purportedly impacting his demeanor. Friends noted a noticeable shift in his behavior post-weight loss, describing instances of bullying and manipulation within his social circle. Several acquaintances asserted that Kohberger battled drug abuse, allegedly starting with marijuana to cope with teenage harassment and escalating to a heroin addiction. He reportedly sought rehabilitation after high school, continuing his education with an associate's degree, and later pursuing higher studies at DeSales University in Center City, Pennsylvania, where he excelled academically in psychology and criminology. And finally, in 2022, he received his master's degree in criminal justice. Kohberger ventured to Washington State University for a PhD program in Pullman, Washington, aiming to achieve a career in law enforcement. However, during this time, he encountered disciplinary issues in his teaching assistant role due to behavioral problems and problematic attitudes toward women. Email correspondence between Kohberger and Professor John Snyder revealed repeated warnings about his professionalism and conduct. Ultimately, on December 19, 2022, a month after the tragic murders, Kohberger was terminated from his teaching position at WSU. On December 30, 2022, Brian Kohberger was apprehended at his parents' residence in Monroe County, Pennsylvania by an FBI SWAT team and Pennsylvania State Police. During the arrest, officials discovered Kohberger in the kitchen, attired in a shirt and shorts, donning examination gloves, and sorting trash into individual Ziploc baggies. He faced charges of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 felony count of burglary upon his arrest. Assigned a public defender, he remained incarcerated without bond at the Monroe County Correctional Facility in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Kohberger's legal representatives asserted his innocence and his determination to establish his clean hands. His family issued a statement extending sympathies to the victims and emphasized the importance of presuming their son's purity. Individuals within Kohberger's social circle were stunned by the accusations against him, although some from his past were less surprised by the allegations. Kohberger then consented to extradition during his initial appearance at the county courthouse on January 3, 2023. Subsequently, on January 4th, he was transported by flight to Pullman and then driven to the Lataka County Jail in Moscow, where he was detained without bail. A week later, on January 12, 2023, he appeared for a status conference in the same courtroom at the courthouse. On May 17, 2023, the Latah County District Court disclosed that Kohberger had been formally charged by a grand jury with 5 offenses, 4 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of felony burglary. The scheduled preliminary hearing set for June 26 was annulled following the indictment. On Monday, May 22, 2023, in Atlantic County District Court, Kohberger declined to enter a plea. As just seen, The judge, in response to this unconventional stance, proceeded to enter a not guilty plea on behalf of Koberger, paving the way for a trial where he could potentially face the death penalty. On June 26, 2023, the Latter County Prosecutor's Office declared its intent to pursue the death penalty due to the statutory aggravating circumstances associated with the first-degree murder charges against Koberger. He remains detained at the Latter County Jail without bond, maintaining a plea of not guilty to all charges. The judge scheduled Koberger's trial for October 2, 2023, accommodating requests from both Koberger's attorney and the state. As of now, no further updates have been disclosed to the public regarding the case. However, it's speculated that prosecutors have requested to schedule Koberger's trial for the summer of 2024. As for the question regarding Koberger's motive for committing this heinous act, the answer remains elusive. Law enforcement authorities believe that the intended target of his attack was either Madison or Kaylee. Nevertheless, no substantial clues or evidence have been discovered thus far to confirm this statement, keeping the case still a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Friday, April 19, 1991, marked the beginning of a slightly longer weekend for 12-year-old David Hibbs. His school had early dismissal, so he got off the bus and arrived at his home on the 1200 block of Spencer Drive in the Croydon area of Bristol Township, Pennsylvania, around 1:05 p.m. That day, David had received his report card and was excited to tell his mother that he'd made the honor roll. However, upon arrival, he saw smoke pouring from the windows of his house. He panicked, knowing his mother was inside because her car was parked in the driveway. David ran to the door, attempting to get inside to help her, but he couldn't get past the flames and thick smoke filling the kitchen. He ran back outside, frantically shouting for someone to help his mother. A neighbor, who was outside doing yard work, heard his cries and called for assistance. While waiting for firefighters, the neighbor and a nearby concrete worker attempted to enter the house but were also forced back by the smoke. David told them his mother might have been napping in her bedroom, so they broke the window in that room. Peering inside, they saw the room was empty. Half a dozen other neighbors came to help, using garden hoses to try to control the blaze. Tragically, David's mother, 36-year-old Joy Hibbs, was inside the house. Her charred body was later found in David's bedroom. Authorities initially assumed she had died in what they believed was an accidental fire. However, it was determined that 3 fires, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen, and one in the bedroom where Joy had been found, had been set deliberately. The autopsy performed on Joy's body the day after her death showed that she had been murdered. There were no signs of smoke inhalation in her lungs, meaning she was dead before the fire started. She had been stabbed in the chest and neck 5 times, beaten badly enough that she had broken ribs, and strangled, most likely with the computer cord found wrapped around her body. The fire appeared to have been set to destroy evidence in the murder. Joy was originally from Central Florida and kept her southern charm even after she moved north. She loved to spend time outdoors fishing and gardening. She and her husband, Charlie, celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary 6 days before she was killed. The couple had 2 children, and Joy was a devoted and loving mother. Her daughter, Angie, who was 16 years old at the time of the murder, would later describe her mother as her best friend. Joy worked as a medical assistant and was highly regarded by everyone in her community. Joy's husband, Charlie, was investigated for involvement in the case, but ultimately cleared of suspicion. He was at a job site in Northeast Philadelphia at the time of the murder. He voluntarily underwent a polygraph examination, which he passed and did everything police asked of him. He was devastated by the loss of his wife. "I don't believe in God anymore," he told the Philadelphia Inquirer 2 months after the murder. "If there was a God, this wouldn't have happened. She never hurt anyone in her life. She had me on a diet and not smoking. Now I die tomorrow, and I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I'm sick to my stomach all the time." Joy had no known enemies, and authorities had little physical evidence to go on as most of the house had been charred by the fire and then covered in water during the efforts to extinguish it. Investigators therefore looked into Joy's movements on the day she was killed. 2 days a week, including Fridays, the doctor's office where Joy worked opened late and stayed open late. She would normally work from 8 a.m. until 2:30 p.m., but on Fridays, she did not have to be at work until 2 p.m., so she had the morning free for her other responsibilities. After getting her children off to school, Joy had gone to the bank to cash her paycheck. Following her death, the contents of her purse were found strewn about her kitchen, and her wallet was found in her couch with no cash in it, indicating that robbery may have been a potential motive for the crime. She left the bank at 9:53 a.m. She then went to the grocery store with a receipt showing that she checked out at 10:54 a.m. Back at home, Joy was visited by a local minister and a member of his congregation. Joy had expressed interest in joining their church after attending services there on Easter. The two visitors were questioned and eliminated as suspects. They were witnessed leaving the home around 11:45. Police, therefore, placed the time of Joy's death as sometime between 11:50 a.m. and 12:50 p.m. During this hour-long window of time, multiple witnesses reported seeing one of the few major clues investigators had: a blue Chevrolet Monte Carlo scene parked haphazardly outside of Joy's house. The car had not only been notable because of how poorly it had been parked and the problems it created for drivers on the street, but also because the Hibbs home was at the center of a T-shaped intersection, making the front of their house an unsafe place to park. A potential suspect, who had a disagreement with Joy shortly before she was killed, did drive such a vehicle. Joy and her husband had started occasionally using marijuana in the late 1980s. Charlie usually obtained the small amount of marijuana they required from a coworker, but Joy had begun purchasing from a former neighbor, a man who drove a blue Monte Carlo. He had recently sold her what turned out to be just stems and seeds. Joy had tried to return it and get her money back, but he had refused. This individual refused to take a polygraph examination, later stating that his attorney had advised him against it because he suffered from carpal tunnel syndrome and nerve damage in his shoulder, which he said could interfere with the results of the test. Police also believed this individual had an alibi for the time of the murder and that a disagreement over a transaction valued at somewhere between $20 and 40 cents was not a sufficient motive for murder. While he was considered a person of interest, there was not enough evidence to charge him with Joy's murder. Joy's family, however, was not convinced of his innocence. In 2014, Joy's son David stated that he believed police knew who the killer was but had botched the investigation because they did not know what they were doing. In 2021, Charlie Hibbs, who is now 66 and living in Washington State, dipped into his retirement funds to offer a $25,000 reward in the case. The 3 decades that had passed since the murder had not eroded his desire to get justice for his wife. "This is something you can't put behind you. You just learn to live with it," he told the Philadelphia Inquirer. "I'm just reaching out for help. She was a good woman, and she never harmed anyone in her life. She didn't deserve what happened, and neither did my children." His son David and a family friend, who wished to remain anonymous, also contributed money, doubling the reward to $50,000 just a year later. An arrest would finally be made in Joy's case. On May 25, 2022, Bucks County District Attorney Matthew Weintraub announced the arrest of 56-year-old Robert Francis Atkins of Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania. He was charged with murder of the first degree, murder of the second degree, 2 counts of arson, and 2 counts of robbery in connection to Joy's murder. Atkins was the person of interest who drove the blue Monte Carlo and had sold Joy marijuana. He had long been suspected by Joy's family. Following the announcement of the reward in May of 2021 and the media coverage it generated, Joy's case was reopened and eventually sent to a grand jury in January of 2022. One of the witnesses called to testify before the grand jury was April Atkins, the ex-wife of Robert Atkins. She had been contacted by police in connection to Joy's murder in 2014 but told them at the time that she did not know anything about it. Then in September of 2016, following the deaths of her mother, niece, and significant other, she knew that there was something she needed to make right, and she went to the Bristol Township Police on her own accord. April told authorities that on the day Joy was murdered, her husband had come home with blood all over his clothes. He told her that he had stabbed someone and set their house on fire. He also ordered her to get their 2 young children ready because they were taking an unplanned weekend trip to the Poconos. He threw his clothes into the washing machine and took a shower. April did not want to leave town because she was due to go to work at 3 p.m. Her job required employees to give them at least 2 hours notice for calling out for a shift if they wanted to use paid leave. Records from her employer confirmed that she had called out at 2:15 on April 19, 1991. The family had already lost their house, 2 doors down from the Hibbs family home, to foreclosure and was living paycheck to paycheck, so going without a day's pay was a major problem. But Atkins insisted that they go. They quickly packed and began driving to a motel in the Poconos. According to April, her husband drove incredibly fast and aggressively the entire drive. When she woke up during that night at the motel, her husband was not there. The next day, he had new sneakers. While they were staying at the motel, he had April dress the kids to take a walk, and they went out to an area behind the motel. Her husband had a bag with him when they started. He disappeared for a while and returned without the bag. The family stayed at the motel from late Friday afternoon until Sunday. Police went to the motel and confirmed that the family was there and accepted the timeline Atkins provided, placing their arrival in the early afternoon, making him appear to have an alibi for the time of Joy's murder when, in fact, he did not. Records from the motel show that the family did not actually check in until 4:53 p.m. Atkins also claimed that the trip had been planned for weeks, a claim his then-wife's last-minute call to work to say she wasn't coming in that day seems to dispute. April stated that she had not come forward because she feared for her life. Robert Atkins had been physically and sexually abusive towards her since she was a teenager. He used drugs, including methamphetamines and steroids, which increased his violent behavior. However, his drug use also led to him becoming a criminal informant with police. He was very close with several officers. April had called police after some of the incidents of domestic violence during their marriage, but believed her husband's relationship with the responding department prevented action from being taken against him. While she and Robert were divorced by the time investigators came to see her in 2014, she was still afraid of him and had to be in regular contact with him because their youngest child, their son Gabriel, was still a minor. Gabriel was living with him at the time as well, potentially putting him in harm's way. April cooperated with police by making a recorded phone call to her ex-husband in December of 2021. Portions of this call were played for the grand jury. She told him a fabricated story about how authorities had arrived at her home to question her about Joy's murder, and that as she was making the call, they were interviewing her roommate, to whom April had admitted her ex-husband's involvement in the murder. He told her in a variety of ways to stop talking to police and that the phone was probably being tapped. He also said that he had explained everything to their son Gabriel. Gabriel also testified before the grand jury. The possibility that his father was involved in a murder and the recent attention his family was getting from law enforcement had taken a major toll on Gabriel's emotional state. He tearfully admitted on the stand that while talking about the case with his father had stated that I might have done it and stuff happened. Joy's son David also testified before the grand jury. He stated that his mother had confided in him, that she had gotten into an argument about marijuana with Atkins just weeks before she was killed. He testified that Atkins told his mother, "I will blow up your house and I will kill you." After hearing testimony over a period of several months, the grand jury recommended that Atkins be charged on May 19, 2022. At his arraignment on May 25th, Atkins was denied bail and he has been remanded to the Bucks County Correctional Facility. A preliminary hearing in the case is scheduled for June 8th. While Joy's family was not shocked by the identity of the man arrested for her murder, they were grateful he is finally being charged in the case. Following the arrest, they released a statement remembering Joy and thanking the members of the DA's office and the police department, whose recent work had led to Atkins being charged for the murder. The statement also read, "The immense grief and suffering our family has endured over the last 3 decades will never disappear. For 31 years, our family has been haunted by this tragic loss, knowing, without a doubt, that Robert Atkins was the perpetrator. Our family has waited 31 years for justice to prevail." Melissa Tremblay was born on March 1, 1977. Her father was not very involved in her life, and she was her mother's only child. According to her friends, Melissa had a fun and bubbly personality. She was a very tough little girl with a spunky attitude. She already had her own distinct personal style and preferred to have her hair feathered and her clothes to have a funky edge to them. Melissa was featured in a local news story, looking for a big sister through the Big Brothers Big Sisters program at the Salem Boys and Girls Club, and stated that she wanted to be a secretary when she grew up because she liked to type. In 1988, Melissa and her mother lived in Salem, New Hampshire, and Melissa was a 6th grade student at the Lancaster School. September 11th that year was a Sunday, and that day, 11-year-old Melissa traveled to Lawrence, Massachusetts, a 20-minute drive away from her home, with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. At some point, while the adults were socializing at LaSalle Social Club on Andover Street, Melissa left the building to go play in the neighborhoods surrounding the club. Melissa was last seen in the late afternoon by a railroad worker and a pizza delivery man. Melissa's mother and her boyfriend frantically looked for Melissa throughout the neighborhoods around the social club but could not find her. They called police to report Melissa missing at 9 p.m. Melissa would not be found until the following day, September 12, 1988. Her body was found in the Old Boston and Main Railway Yard near Andover Street and South Broadway, not far from the Social Club and South Broadway. Not far from the Social Club, she had been stabbed to death. After she was killed, her body had been run over by a train, amputating her left leg. Police interviewed numerous witnesses and identified multiple persons of interest over the years, but did not find enough evidence to arrest a suspect. Serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, who rode rail lines and worked at carnivals, was considered as a potential suspect, but ultimately cleared of involvement in Melissa's murder. Melissa's mother passed away without ever learning who killed her daughter. Melissa's friend, Andrea Ganley, was just 7 years old at the time of Melissa's murder. Losing her friend in such a brutal way at such a young age played a major part in shaping the person she would grow up to be. As an adult, Andrea pressed for police to remain focused on the case and used social media to raise awareness about Melissa and her murder. According to authorities, the social media campaign was helpful as it resulted in new tips being called in. Melissa's case was formally reopened in 2014 and investigated by assistant district attorneys and state police detectives assigned to the Essex District Attorney's Office Cold Case Unit. It would take several more years of work before an arrest was finally made in Melissa's case. On April 27, 2022, nearly 34 years after Melissa was killed, Essex District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett announced that the night before, 74-year-old Marvin C. McClendon Jr. of Bremen, Alabama had been arrested as a fugitive from justice. He was considered a fugitive because of an arrest warrant that had been issued for him that day for Melissa's murder. McClendon was a retired corrections officer, previously employed by the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, working for the department on 3 different occasions between 1970 and 2002. At the time of Melissa's murder, he was living in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, but he had several ties to the city of Lawrence. At the time, he was moonlighting as a carpenter and worked at several locations in Lawrence. He furthermore was known to frequent several establishments there, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Salem Street. He also drove a van that matched the description of one witnesses had seen Melissa near on the day she was killed. At the time of the press conference, McClendon was in the custody of the Cullman County Sheriff's Office pending his arraignment. A judge in Massachusetts had already ruled that he would be held without bond. McClendon ultimately waived rendition and was sent back to Massachusetts instead of first appearing in an Alabama court, mishearing when it will be determined if he should continue to be held in custody. According to DA Blodgett, McClendon had been a person of interest in the case for some time. He further stated that evidence found on Melissa's body was instrumental in identifying McClendon as her killer. However, due to the ongoing criminal case, he could not elaborate on the nature of that evidence at the time of McClendon's arrest. On the day of McClendon's first court appearance, prosecutors stated that DNA evidence had been found on Melissa's body when the case was reopened in 2014. Advanced DNA analysis eventually led them to McClendon's family. They took DNA samples from several members of the family, including Marvin. The rest of his family lives in Alabama, and he is the only known member of the family to have ever been in Massachusetts. He is also the only known member of his family who is left-handed, and analysis of Melissa's fatal wound showed that it had been inflicted by someone who was left-handed. Essex Victim Advocates has been in contact with the surviving members of Melissa's extended family. The family police who have worked so hard over the years to make sure justice was found. Since her murder in 1988, we have always prayed for justice. We are very eager for the next steps that the Essex County DA's office will be taking in the prosecution of Marvin McClendon. It was on October 13, 1987 in Boise, Idaho, when Joyce Casper was found in her car just a few blocks from her business, Casper's Vista Hallmark and Gift Shop. She had been murdered, and her death would shake the community. Joyce was 65 years old when she died. Joyce was well known in the community to be kind and caring. She and her husband, who was a pharmacist, owned a pharmacy until 1986 until they opened Casper's Vista Hallmark and Gift Shop. Her husband, John Casper, had died in 1982, and Joyce continued to run the shop after his death. John and Joyce had 3 children together, 2 daughters and 1 son. Joyce was known to work late, and it wasn't odd for her to be at the shop until very late in the evening. So she could have been attacked any time between the evening of October 12th and the early morning of October 13th. Authorities would eventually release that they believe Joyce had been abducted from her shop, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death before being put in her car and driven away. Another significant piece of evidence was that Joyce had reported being attacked in her shop 2 weeks prior to her murder. But she had managed to scare him off, and the attacker had run away quickly. During the encounter, he'd attempted to assault her. She reported that the man was in his late teens, early 20s with slicked back black hair. Police never found this man nor the man who had killed Joyce. The case would go cold very quickly with no witnesses and very little evidence that could be used in 1987, and all the leads soon dried up. But in 1988, another attack similar to Joyce's reopened the case. Another woman in her 60s had been attacked, but in her case, her attacker was found quickly and denied having any involvement with Joyce's case. Even though there were several similarities, the case would again turn cold, and it would stay that way for decades. It was reopened in 2005 when they took another look at the evidence that had been preserved in 1987. However, at that time, nothing new came up. But in 2017, 2 detectives were assigned permanently to the case, and scientific advancements had caught up with DNA analysis. They sent a DNA sample believed to have been from the suspect to Parbon Nanolabs, and they were able to create a computer-generated profile of the potential suspect. They would release that they believed the suspect was Latin American, possibly from Puerto Rico or Colombia. The data from the genetic markers would reveal that he had brown or hazel eyes, brown or black hair, and that he didn't have freckles. In 2017, they would admit that some of this, like the hair, may have changed in the 30 years since the murder, but that they had hoped someone would recognize the composite image created by their program. In 2019, a new detective would start to work the case, this time working with Identifinders International in the hopes of using genetic genealogy to help find a suspect. This analysis would take until 2023 to reveal the suspect. And it was in July 2023 when the Boise Police Department announced they had found a suspect in the 36-year-old cold case, Frank Rodriguez. Unfortunately, no arrest could be made as Rodriguez had died in 2007 by suicide. Authorities met with his family, taking DNA swabs which were analyzed and proved through genetics that Rodriguez was the suspect. Even though he had passed, both the retired Boise detectives that had worked the case and the Casper family were relieved to have some answers about what had happened to Joyce after all this time. Rodriguez had a history of violent outbursts, mental health issues, and substance abuse, but he didn't have a criminal record. At the time of Joyce's murder, he would have only been 17 years old, and he lived only blocks away from the store. He spent the rest of his life living in the area and is being investigated in connection to other cold cases in Idaho. Rodriguez's physical description at the time also matched report Joyce gave from the attempted assault that had taken place at her store 2 weeks prior to her murder. Police have asked if anyone knows anything about Frank Rodriguez to contact the Boise police, as they believe this is probably not his only crime. It was on May 3, 1975, when a farmer was checking the back end of his property near the Nation River, about 40 kilometers east of Ottawa, Canada. He noticed something floating in the river, and there he found a woman's body, face down in the water. Before doing anything, he called the police. The Ottawa Police Department arrived and discovered a woman's bloated naked body with a cloth covering her face. She had a dark blue leotard top. Bunched up around her neck, her hands had been bound in front of her with a blue necktie with Canadian flags, and her ankles had also been bound with 2 additional men's ties. The cloth around her head was described as 2 pieces of a bloody green fabric, a disposable hand towel, and a distinctive Irish linen tea towel. Loosely wrapped around her neck was a television cable, and a piece of a curtain rod runner could be found in her armpit. The autopsy would put her age between 25 and 35. She had shoulder-length dyed red hair that was believed to have been brown naturally with hazel or blue eyes, believed to be about 100 pounds, and she was 5'5" tall. Both her fingers and toenails were painted red. She had a high-quality partial dentures with multiple fillings, having police believe that she was of a middle-class background. They stated that it appeared she'd never had children, and she'd had her appendix removed. She'd also eaten a large meal right before her death. Her larynx had been fractured, and her case was ruled a homicide due to the nature of the body's decomposition that couldn't determine if she'd been sexually assaulted. Her body was believed to have been in the river for about 1 to 4 weeks, putting her time of death between April 5th and April 26th. Police believe she'd been dumped in the river from a nearby bridge. When they investigated, they found blood on the bridge. It wasn't enough to get a blood type at that time, but they assumed it was from the woman. There had been heavy rain on April 19th, so that led authorities to believe she'd been dumped between the 19th and the 26th. All of this information, and police had one key piece missing. They couldn't identify the woman. They combed hundreds of missing persons reports. They contacted dentists locally as the Jane Doe had a custom denture made for her and several fillings. Their forensic dental imprints were published in dental journals in North America and overseas, but no one recognized them. Law enforcement knocked on doors in a 25-kilometer radius of the bridge. They tracked down where the TV cable had been sold and checked hotels and motels where it might have been installed, but nothing. The necktie that had bound her had been made in Montreal and sold all over Ontario and Quebec. The tea towel from Ireland was imported by a Toronto company and sold in mass quantities until 1972. Nothing seemed to spark any leads. Without knowing who the woman was, the police had very little to go on. Was she from Canada? Was she a visitor? Had she recently moved here? Had she come from Montreal or was just dumped near Ottawa, which at the time was a technique often used by criminals to confuse detectives? She would be dubbed the Nation River Lady, and she'd stay in a Toronto morgue until 1987, 12 years after the discovery. She was eventually buried in Toronto Mount Pleasant Cemetery. News of her burial would bring in some fresh tips, but would lead to dead ends. The Nation River Lady would be in the news every few years, with new sketches and advancements, but still they couldn't identify the woman. It wasn't until 2023 when Canadian officials would announce that they not only had identified the Nation River Lady, but had a suspect in custody. The Nation River Lady was identified as Jewel Parchman Langford, was 48 when she died and had traveled from her hometown in Tennessee and moved to Montreal in April 1975. She was a successful businesswoman who owned a spa with her ex-husband, and she'd been well missed by her family, who'd reported her missing shortly after not hearing from her in 1975. Her parents and siblings had all passed by the time she was identified, but she still had some nieces who helped identify her after all these years. The module was identified after her body was exhumed in 2019 for a new DNA profile, which the Canadian authorities shared with US-based DNA-Do-E project. Using genetic genealogy, they could upload the results into the database shared with the police. Quickly, they found a match and had new samples taken from living relatives, which Canadian labs confirmed. They'd been able to make the announcement privately with the family in 2020 that they had identified Jewel. This was kept out of the press in the hopes of finding more information about her killer. The suspect was also identified via genetic genealogy. Florida native Rodney Nichols is now 81 years old and was living in Montreal and worked as a professional rugby player at the time of the murder. It would come out that Nichols had been dating Jewel at the time. It is being reported that once he was arrested, he confessed to the murder, but this is now being called into question by his lawyer. In the confession, he said that he killed her because she had lied about her age being 48 when he was only 32. Nichols had previously been investigated in connection to her disappearance, but he claimed to have lied to law enforcement when Jewel had been reported missing, saying he had heard from her and she was well and in Vancouver. Nichols is not being investigated for any other cold cases at this time. The Ottawa government is now working on extraditing Nichols to Canada, hoping he will face charges in Ottawa. This case is still ongoing and Nichols has not been convicted at this time. Jewel's family is glad to have answers, and in 2022 they had a small ceremony after her body had been sent back to Tennessee, where her grave marker was changed from missing to finally home and at peace. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.